educate different organizations and entities about how blockchain solutions can impact their organization. So coming up, Gerard.
Thank you, Allison. Can we download that maybe as a PowerPoint, you guys, in the booth? Can we possibly put that in presentation mode? Thank you. You might have to download it. All right, so my name is Gerard Dache. I'm the executive director and founder. What? Oh, could you put that in presentation mode? The presentation.
Yeah, what?
No. Can you put it in presentation mode? It's in Dropbox. You need to download it as a PowerPoint. That's the volume. All right, well, we can do it this way. Guys, if that's an issue, we can do it this way. You good? I can handle it.
You have the slides you need.
I have the slides I need. Oh, there he goes. You did it. Look at that. Ask and ye shall receive. Thank you. All right. Yes, so my name is Gerard Dache. I'm the executive director of the Government Blockchain Association. Thank you guys for being here. We're going to talk a little bit about acquiring blockchain solutions. So this is part of a presentation we're actually developing for acquisition officials at the U.S. federal level, and it will also be available to others as well. So it's kind of an in development thing. But it's important. Well, let me get into it. Well, I thought I was going to get into it. Volume. So I'm not able, the down button? And then that takes me back. Yes, user error. Okay. Okay, so we're going to talk about the acquisition lifecycle that all federal government acquisition professionals need to be aware of. But we're going to talk specifically about when they're acquiring blockchain solutions, what do they need to be mindful of? And I shared this story before in terms of why this is important. We were working with a government organization that asked us to do a BMM assessment. And they said to us, I said, well, why do you want that? And they said, well, we think we're level 5. We travel around the world. We tell everybody how great we use blockchain. And to make a long story short, when they let out the contract for the blockchain solution, they didn't put anywhere in the contract that it had to be a blockchain. So sometime later, when the Ethereum prices went up, the contractor looked at the contract and said, well, there's nothing in here about blockchain. So they basically, instead of using the blockchain, they transferred all the data to an unmanaged server underneath one of the employees' desks. So this government agency was running around the world telling everybody what a leader they were in blockchain while that was going on. So what it highlights is that people in government, they need to know about blockchain and emerging technologies. All right, so we're going to be talking about this life cycle and what they need to know about. Okay, a little bit about me. So I did spend some time in the military, spent some time with government in both Army infantry and intelligence, then got involved in government contracting, then spent many years going around the world basically helping companies prove that they could be trusted by government. I also am the co-leader of the United Nations Internet Governance Forum Blockchain Assurance and Standardization Dynamic Coalition. So in that capacity, I've got pretty broad areas. Okay. So let me tell you just a little bit about the Government Blockchain Association. The GBA is a membership organization. We have members in about 500 government offices around the world at the local, state, national, and international level. We have about 50 or so working groups. We develop standards, we do conferences. It's a pretty broad group. We deal with everything from artificial intelligence to votings and elections and quantum. Right? Okay, what makes Web3 unique, right? The first thing that's important to understand is it's new technology, right? So these government acquisition people, they don't understand this technology. And consequently, they're likely to make mistakes when they acquire it, or they're not going to acquire it at all. There's a lot of false assumptions and narratives. A lot of them think that crypto is bad, right? Any kind of digital assets is bad, it's illegal, it's full of fraud, it's for money launderers and terrorists. The industry is immature. So if a government acquisition official is going to buy I don't know, a learning management system, right, or any other kind of technology. That's a mature technology. The safeguards, the knowledge, the infrastructure does not exist in blockchain. And there's a lack of standards, right? Every other industry, I mentioned this before, there's a box to check. In blockchain, there's no box to check, right? There's no certification. So acquisition officials don't have anything to rely on. It's transformative, right? So when the internet came out, the internet essentially was, it was brand new because it allowed us to share information, right? To transfer information, to share information from one person to another. Blockchain is different in that it allows us to transfer value. So when the internet came out, we started things with like file transfers and email. Nobody really imagined that one day we'd be swiping right or left to see who we're going to marry, right? Or get into a stranger's car, drive to a stranger's house, get into a stranger's bed, right? It was just, we had no idea. Well, blockchain is doing that with the exchange of value, right? So who knows all the different ways that that's going to impact us. And it's a complex technology because a lot of the other technologies just stay in the technology space, but this is now in the legal and regulatory space. This now is dealing with money. It's dealing with privacy. It's dealing with usage rights. It's dealing with so many things that are far beyond just what a CTO has to deal with. So it's a very complex thing. Okay. And it represents a paradigm shift, right? So folks in government like it the way it is, right? I think I mentioned to some of you that I was meeting with the ICT minister of Cameroon, and this person works directly for the president, and the president had just won re-election for his 38th year in democratic elections, right? And she said to me, she said, we're interested in blockchain and all of its uses except for elections. Right? The president is just won his 38th year, his re-election. We like our election system just the way we have it, right? It represents a shift of power and control, right? That's very different. Yeah, so this technology is very, very different from other technologies, so people need to be educated about it. Okay, so this is the acquisition lifecycle. We're just going to focus on the front end, right? The mission need, the requirements, and the market research. So, first question. Do we need a blockchain? What is this all about? Why do we even have a blockchain? To answer that question, you have to go back a couple decades to a guy named David Chaum. And he wrote a paper. He was actually trying to build out a project called DigiCash, which never actually got off the ground. But he wrote this paper called Computer Systems Established, Maintained, and Trusted by Mutually Suspicious Groups, right? And that idea really led to Stewart and Scott creating this thing called blockchain. Now, if we look at the world today, especially from a government perspective, right, what are the things that could cause us to have mutually suspicious groups, right? Voting in elections, right? Voting elections, everybody trusts each other. Hey, you can give those votes to the Republican guy, let him count it. I'll take his word for it as a Democrat, or vice versa, right? No, we don't trust voting in elections. Public funds, data privacy, just protecting our rights. So the first real question for an acquisition official is, do we need a blockchain? And the second question, or maybe it's the other way around, is, do we have mutually suspicious groups? Can we trust each other? Look, if you can trust the bank, you don't need Bitcoin. But Bitcoin was created because the banks were too big to fail, right? So, do we have trust? If the answer is yes, you don't need a blockchain. If the answer is no, maybe you do. Here's the thing. If you don't need a blockchain, don't use it. It's more complicated. You're dealing with a lot more risks. So only use a blockchain if you have mutually suspicious groups. Let's talk about suspicion. It ain't the same anymore, right? This is kind of an old headline. 53,000 Wells Fargo's employees fired for creating millions of fake accounts. While that story is old, the things behind it across the industry haven't changed, right? I'm from the government. I'm here to help. Public trust in government has dropped dramatically. in the 1950s and 1960s, 75% of people trusted government, right? Today, that number is between 17 and 30%. Confidence in major institutions remains near historic low, and the shifts sharply by political persuasion. Public concerns center on whether government is competent, fair, responsive, transparent, and careful with taxpayer dollars. All the folks in government are really careful with taxpayer dollars, yes? No. Right? And the pattern is not only here in America, it's global. But boy, do we have lots of examples, right? I mean, just think about, was it last year, all the stuff with Minnesota and stuff like that? It was on the news all the time. Public trust ranges from 17 to 30%, and it is worse with Congress, the criminal justice system, Supreme Courts, public schools, the presidency, and the federal government overall. So again, when you're talking about a government acquisition perspective and somebody talks about blockchain, do we trust one another, right? Do we not trust one another? If we don't trust one another, okay, let's talk blockchain. Oh, and if you're dealing with some of these industries or domains, right, this is where it's the lowest, right? News and media, social media technology platforms, health insurance, managed health, pharmaceuticals, oil and gas. They're having a big problem with that in Russia right now, right? Financial services, cryptocurrency, insurance, telecom and cable, airlines, and large corporations. So across the board, people are losing trust. And AI, deep fakes, it's not making it any easier. So, what is it that's causing this lack of trust, right? Lack of transparency, misuse of personal information, hidden fees or confusing terms, excessive political influence, misinformation and manipulation, safety and quality failures, poor constituent treatment, weak executive accountability, and perceived prioritization over people in profit, right? So if you're building a solution and any of these things are potentials, then yeah, you probably need a blockchain. Okay, so the new paradigm is, look, show me, right? I don't want to take your word for it. We have the technology. You can show me. So government actions should be more transparent and independently verifiable. Records should be auditable, tamper evident, right? Easier for oversight bodies to validate. Funds should be more traceable from appropriate, from source to result. The decision process should make responsibility and accountability clear. And modernization should focus on measurable trust, evidence, verification, stewardship, and outcomes. So remember, the portion of this presentation that we're talking about is essentially determining the need, right? These are the things that we should be looking at if we're going to be building or developing a system. These are the things that we ought to be these are the targets we should be trying to hit. So what does blockchain do for us? We've got data integrity, auditability, and public accountability. We have efficiency and automation through smart contracts, and the ability to be able to take money and embed it into the process, right, creates efficiencies and transparency that is phenomenal. It gives us governance and accountability. We can set rules, privacy and access control, and security. So, do I need a blockchain? If the answer is yes, then what are the things that we need to consider? So, as we're preparing to acquire a blockchain solution, the first question we have to ask ourselves is, well, who's going to be involved in this thing, right? We got the program leadership. Do they even know what they're wanting or asking for? Do they want more accountability, right? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. The acquisition, contracting, and financial management staff. There are a lot of reasons not to do a blockchain. One of them is you're introducing this new technology. I don't know anything about it. You're threatening my job, right? One of them is look, we've got this existing system. You're just asking to do a lot of work. Our system's not going to be compatible with that system, right? You've got technology teams. I wish I could sit around and just tell you stories all day. And you got compliance officials, right? There are. I'm gonna have to show you this. Somebody once told me they were talking about a CFO. CFO is the chief frown officer, but they said that he used to do the Baptist twist. You guys have to look at me for this. This is funny. This is the Baptist twist. You like that? I'm not Baptist. It's no ding on Baptist, but there are some people especially in compliance, right, where everything is not allowed, right, because they don't want to take that risk. All right. All right, preparing to acquire blockchain solutions. So if we understand who these people are that have to be involved, the first question we have to ask is, do they know what we're doing? This is a big part of change management, right? And how are you going to overcome resistance? Look, inertia is a big problem, especially in government, right? Exposure. So we did a report recently on using blockchain to prevent government fraud, waste, abuse in grants and contract management. And what we found is that the people in that staff, they did not have the bandwidth to do proper due diligence on grant requests. And the stuff they were letting go by was just abominable, right? Their thing was, look, I just don't have the time and the bandwidth. I have so many demands on my schedule, and if we do this blockchain thing, they'll find out I'm not doing my job. And our response was, well, they'll find out that you don't have the resources to do your job. Maybe you'll get more funding, right? It's a lot of work, and then sometimes people are just afraid. So, understanding the very first thing you got to get through is the human dynamics. When you get past the human dynamics, now you got to think about some of the technical requirements. Well, what's the demand well, first of all, we got the stakeholders, right? Who are the network participants? If you're going to build a blockchain, who's going to control the nodes? Who's going to provide the data, right? Where's that data going to go to, right? Who the users are. What about the support staff that have to support it? Do they have the skills and knowledge necessary? Okay, then we got to talk about transactions, right? What are the types of transactions? Who are the stakeholders, right? What is the frequency and the throughput? That's all going to impact the technical requirements. Then we get in the environment. Is this going to have to live on a government in a government environment? If it does, then there's certain certifications that we have to go through, right? In some cases, it might be, look, this is going to be for an election system, and the election authority will not allow data to reside outside of that state or that county, right? So hardware, software, are these, yeah, there's a lot there. And then the regulatory constraints. What are the current policies and procedures that may not allow for this kind of technology? I'll tell you an interesting story. When Uber entered the market, right, the process was that if you were going to have a cab, you'd have to go to New York City or Washington. You have to buy a medallion. The price in New York for a medallion was over $1 million, right? Uber came in and said, look, this is ridiculous. So instead of living under the regular authority where I'm going to get into the hail a ride business, which requires me to do the medallion, I'm going to essentially do a prearranged ride network business. So they changed the regulatory description, right, which enabled them to do things that they couldn't do under the old description. There's a voting and election company. Oh, and incidentally, when they realized that they faced so much resistance, what they decided to do was enter in a market where there was regulatory uncertainty, create a mess, forcing the government to create regulatory clarity and rules. So there's a lot of interesting parallels there. We got some companies that do blockchain voting in elections. The requirements are that you can't have anything in elections that touch the internet, right? So how do they launch blockchain-based voting in a national election and for different states without getting around that? The law also requires that each of the jurisdictions provide a way for overseas military personnel and people with handicaps and disabilities to be able to vote. So the current way that they're doing that is through fax, mail-in voting, email, and file uploads. And so they're able to use that legal and regulatory kind of carve-out to be able to do blockchain voting. So this regulatory constraints is a real, it's something that you cannot underemphasize. And then you've got the organizational political, right? There are some people that no matter what you propose are going to say no because they're the opposition, right? In the UK, they refer to the party not in power as the opposition party. Their job is to oppose. You have that in every level and branch of government. So then we got to do some market research, right? Where do I find these blockchain Web3 businesses, right? What are their capabilities? How do I know who to trust? What do I ask them? And when I do get that information, how do I evaluate that response? So here's the first thing I would tell you about how to find them. We were actually developing a directory, Web3 solution directory. If you've got a Web3 solution, you should put it in the directory. If you're looking for one, we're developing it, so we got a bunch of stuff in there. By the end of this year, we hope to distribute it to governments and people in 500 governments around the world. But it's also referred to by the United Nations. So it's a start. You can do all kinds of searches. When you find them, you've got to ask, well, what their capabilities are. This is all part of the research before you ever release the RFP, right? Performance is really, really big in blockchain. So what are the cost drivers, right? What about performance? Are there a certain number of transactions per second you can do? Most people will blow smoke in this area. So if they tell you an answer, you got to ask, well, how do you know? And that how do you know answer's got to, it's got to pass the make sense test. You need some domain expertise. You've got to ask about integration with other blockchain and legacy systems. Interoperability right now is a huge key. That's why it's an entire element in the blockchain maturity model. Compliance with government criteria such as, right, the NIST risk management framework, right? If you're going to do stuff with government, you need something called an authority to operate, an ATO. There are a couple projects that have done it, not many. FedRAMP is for cloud services in the government. You know, you got CMMC, NIST, privacy standards, cybersecurity standards. All of these things, when you're going out and talking to potential contractors and vendors and trying to figure out what requirements you should put in RFP, these are some of the things that you need to find out about. And then, how do I know who to trust? Okay, so here's what you should not trust. Don't trust any self-proclaimed statements. Again, especially don't say, hey, check out our advisors. This is, you know, when I go to a web page and it shows me all of these incredible people that are their advisors. Who did Sam Bankman-Fried say was behind him? Movie stars, sports athletes, right? What do those people know about exchanges, right? And because they don't have anything else, this is what people tend to rely on. To me, that's a big red flag. Second-party attestation. So there's other things like formal verification, smart contract audits, ISO certifications. These you got to take with a grain of salt, especially smart contract audits. Sadly, there are a lot of organizations that say, hey, send us some money, we'll send you your smart contract audit results. Well, wait a minute, don't you want to see my code? No, you don't have to send your code. Just send us some money, we'll send you the smart contract audits. Which is why we actually built a standard for smart contract auditors for people to actually be able to demonstrate that they're real and legit in that space. ISO certifications are, they tend to be a little better. The problem is that, that unless you're in an industry-specific space, a lot of times they don't have the industry expertise, right? And I'll give you an example. FTX was audited 3 times by one of the big 5, maybe big 3 auditing firms. The problem is they didn't understand blockchain. So they went in there, they followed the same old checklist, but it wasn't able to catch the nuances of blockchain. So that's why we keep pushing people to the blockchain maturity model, because it's the only industry-specific standard that you can use to evaluate blockchain solutions. So then you send out a request for information. And again, these are the things that you're looking for. I'm going backwards. So the only thing that I think is different on here is the two bottom bullets, right? How do you perform network synchronization? So currently we think of consensus as how blockchains achieve network synchronization. There's a lot of different ways to do it. There's a lot of very, very interesting protocols that have just great performance capabilities. And then key management. There is an exchange in Canada. I forgot how much money was on the exchange, bazillions, gazillions of dollars. The owner of that exchange went to, I don't know, Vietnam, someplace in the East, and then apparently died. No, I think he went to India, and then he died. And he died with the keys. So everybody that had any money on that exchange were out of luck. So how do you do key management? Of course, if the keys get into the hands of the wrong people, that's pretty bad. So there are standards about that, but that's when you're dealing with a blockchain solution, that's a critical thing to find out about. And then as far as trust is concerned, remember, you've got centralized, you've got hybrid, and you got decentralized. What's their trust model? Is it such that somebody can come in and lie, steal, cheat, damage, fraud? What are the protections against that? What are your single point of failure risks? We were just talking about Toy Story, right? They had that command that somebody could hit a button and delete all the Toy Story movie files from the entire company, right? Data locations, are there jurisdictional boundaries? Key management we talked about, node ownership and administration. These are all core considerations. Now, if the solution is going to have a token, right, again, is it going to be a security token, a utility token? How are you going to manage that token? What blockchain layer is it going to be on? Right, what are the different wallet types? Does a wallet type require identity control, access management? Right, is it a security versus utility? Are there geofencing requirements? These are all things that you have to consider if your solution has a token. And then acquisition planning, right? Ensure that the acquisition team includes people that understand the blockchain technology, the user requirements, the technical environment, the compliance requirements. Identify and manage the acquisition risks, which includes stakeholder bias. Some people are like, I'm into Solana or I'm into Cardano and that's it, right? Or I'm against them, right? What vendor solutions are you going to use? Political considerations. Then you have to determine the acquisition type, process, and timeline. Is it a sole source? Right, is it going to be competitive? Right, that's a whole other area that goes into acquisitions. Now, when you write the RFP, we put thousands and thousands and thousands of hours into asking the right questions through the blockchain maturity model. Download the thing, use it. That really ought to be, I don't want to call it a checklist, but it ought to drive the questions. So you've got all of those right there. And it applies to all those different components, the on-chain components, the off-chain components, assets, data, encryption keys, tokens, nodes, synchronization mechanisms, right, infrastructure, all of that stuff. So rather than try to figure it out all on your own, right, the resources there, use it. And then these are the different areas. Now, that list of domain areas, we're expanding all the time. So that's what it is currently, but there's always more coming. Artificial intelligence, yeah, it's on there. That's in draft. Okay? So there's a link to the blockchain maturity model. Final thoughts? Compare apples to apples, right? You will get a bunch of responses. And not all blockchains are the same. The way they handle them are not all the same. You've got to kind of figure out the apples to apples comparison. You want to rely on unbiased objective criteria. Again, I can't stress the blockchain maturity model enough. Independent third-party certifications. And like I said, FTX passed 3 audits from unqualified sources. Okay, and then here's some resources. So we got a YouTube channel with a ton of videos. Eric is on some of those videos, actually a bunch of them. We have a conference coming up September 29th to October 2nd. We'll have about 450 people here in the US. I'm sorry, in Washington, about 570 people at the United Nations headquarters in New York. We've got this governance certified blockchain advisor certification program, and yeah, just a ton of resources for you. All right, so that's my contact information. If you want any more information, that's how you can get a hold of me, and I'm with the GBA, so I'll leave it there. Are any of you guys involved in acquisitions? I'm guessing not. Well, you are. What's your, what do you do with acquisitions?
Not directly, but I work with a lot of large U.S. Air Force installation that does a lot of sensitive procurements.
Okay.
The Air Force Innovation Exchange. But I was interested, a lot of the things you said were about running blockchain soup to nuts. And have you seen use cases for using public blockchains purely for attestation?
For attestation, like Providence kind of thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like this thing that happened off-chain actually happened, and it happened at this time. Yeah, if you, because that seems like a much lower bar that
Yeah.
government puts to.
Yeah, in fact, Stuart Haber, who was here earlier, that's one of the very first things that they did with surety. Just recently, who's our friend down in South America, Eric? They had a project called Fiscal Digital, right? And that it basically is voting in elections. And the way that model worked, this was outside the country, but what's that? Yeah. What's the guy's name? Carlos Torriella. Yeah. He's actually the winner of a GBA Annual Achievement Award. Yeah, but there's a lot of examples like that. You're right. That's a low bar that's easy to get over. Yeah, and they've got a new project. I can't remember what it's called, but it's yeah. Yeah. Yes, exactly. All right. So look, we had one. So I should have been sitting here, interviewing you on. Did any of this stuff make sense? Oh yeah. Good, because I made it all up. Okay. All right. Ugh. Don't get me started. Yes, sir.
So, what would you say in all your time of doing the blockchain maturity model are the top 3 issues or problems you find with the submissions that need to be addressed with these blockchain companies?
So the first one I would say is they focus so much on the technical, right, that they ignore everything else, right? And that's the first one. So they lack any kind of documentation. So if you ask them to prove anything, it's all verbal, right? So there's no way, look, even if they were as good as they say they are, there's no way for them to be able to prove it. So that would be the first. The second one I would say, and this kind of, Eric is an attorney, is not understanding the legal and regulatory components, right? So many times they think, oh, well, we're going to call it a utility, so everything will be fine. And not recognizing what you know is that there's a lot of things that could trip that bar and get them into trouble. And thirdly, they don't really have a good financial sustainability plan. They kind of are operating on the if we build it, they will come, without really understanding it's not always that easy, right? So those are the 3 things that I would say are the biggest things that we've seen.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
From a more long-term perspective, right? Pre-K 3 and 4, where do you see this
I'm sorry, you said prepaid?
When you're dealing with the kids, on
Oh, pre-K.
the pre-K, pre-head start perspective, where do you see, this going where when they turn 18, the feeder, that they'll be more, accustomed to the technology than, the baby boomers and
That's a great question. When I look at that generation, I got to tell you, we got a huge question mark there because I think
I'm sorry. And the second part of the question is, I got grandkids, right? So it's summertime. And if you don't have Apple Pay, they look at you like you're giving them a food stamp.
yeah. Look, I think the biggest threat to the next generation is AI, right? I don't know how that's going to impact them. I don't know what new opportunities it's going to create for them. The world is changing so quickly. It's a great question. I wish I had a better answer.
Because, I'm going to have to go back and explain this to my staff, and I already know the first thing they're going to say is, but why do I have to use this thing? Why?
Yeah, I would say, and I would answer that question very easily. Look, it's all about trust. So if you trust the people and the entities you're working with, honestly, you don't need blockchain. Blockchain, the whole idea of I'll use a Bitcoin transaction is I can send you a Bitcoin. I don't need a bank. I don't need to put my money in some place where the government or the bank could seize those funds or could know what I'm doing with the funds, right? If we have a complete trust relationship, right, we don't need a third, well, if we don't need a third party, right, I'm kind of blending a couple things. But blockchain is really all about working with people and entities that you don't trust. So Scott Sternetta and Stuart Hayward are working with this thing called SureMark because we can't trust what we see online, right? I mean, we don't know if it's a deep fake or not. So he's trying to come up with a way that they can use blockchain so that so if it's on the blockchain, we can at least trust it, right? So it's all about trust. Now, these kids, look, right now, you can't trust what you see on TV. You can't trust what you read on the internet. You can't trust what your friends and your parents tell you because, oh, they're listening to Fox or they're listening to CNN, they're getting fed a load of garbage, right? We got a huge problem with trust, right? Blockchain is a tool that can help us deal with it, but we got to figure a lot of stuff out about how to use that tool to solve some of these trust issues. And AI, I think, just makes it worse because now you got AI can hallucinate, right? We've got a huge trust issue. And now getting into more the psychology, the human development, now you got these kids growing up. Who are they going to trust? So I'm sorry, I got a lot more questions and answers for you, but these are just things that I think about. Sure. Yeah, Eric.
Yeah, so I agree with the top three answers that you gave me, but in response to his, I want to give a number 4.
Okay.
In the B2C world, the problem I see is that they create these blockchain solutions, but there's no user adoption, there's no user interface. So what kids need are for companies to build blockchain products that are easy to use. They can just swipe and they can get to the app and they can just use it. Because they're not going to go to download MetaMask and do other kind of complicated stuff. They should be able to turn on a phone, click on an app, and start using it.
So, yeah.
Block just did this with Cash App.
Exactly.
Yeah, if you have a Cash App handle, you can take $10 in your Cash App account fiat. You can send it to a Ethereum, Arbitrum, or Polygon address, and it just shows up as a stable coin. You never have to buy a stable coin. You have to do anything. It's just
Yeah, so
it's
coming.
coming.
It's
It's
on
getting
other sites
there.
now.
So
Yeah, but it highlights something that I put in the category of the battle for the soul of blockchain, right? Because what's happening is these companies, right, are attempting to create easy solutions. This is what happened with the iPhone, right? I love my iPhone. It is so easy. I got no privacy anymore, everything I do, right, this conversation I'm having with you, that data is collected somewhere. I've lost all price. It is so easy to use. And so these companies that are doing those things are doing it because data is the new gold, right? And so, yeah, they're tough issues, yeah.
Let me rephrase the question.
Then I'm going to have to rephrase the answer.
How do we train the kids towards the blockchain model moving forward? How do we get the superintendents to buy into the
I need to introduce you to a guy named Ryan. I'm trying to remember Ryan's last name. He's got something called Blockchain USA Kids, I think. And he's focusing on developing stories and books and literature and education material for kids. And I know this is a passion of yours. I'm going to see, but before we leave, I'll see if I can get you connected because I think it's a great opportunity for you. All right. Michael, how are we doing? Are we out of time? At 12 minutes? Well, if you guys want to go get a drink or something like that, I'm game. So we can wrap it up. All right? All right, thanks, guys.